No.
Welcome to the My Haunt Life podcast.
Hello and welcome to the My Haunt Life podcast. This is Russell.
I'm Mike.
And we have a very special episode. We are lucky enough to live in a city with a great deal of choices when it comes to immersive theater. Mike and I often talk on this podcast about exploration and adventure and play. And we have today several guests with us for the podcast who are from the Speakeasy Society, which in my opinion personally is one of those companies that has given Mike and I some of those wonderful, adventurous exploration, playful moments in events that we've attended from the Speakeasy Society. Please, let's go around the table and introduce yourselves.
Great. I'm Matthew Bamberg Johnson. I'm one of the co-artistic directors.
My name's Julianne Just. I'm also a artistic director.
And I'm Genevieve Gearhart, the other artistic director.
And I'm Chris Porter. I'm an associate artistic director.
Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for stopping by and having a chat, because Mike and I are huge fans, and we've got a few questions. First of all, I want to just basically quote your website, because you have a wonderful, I don't want to say mission statement, but you actually have this really very direct definition on your website of the Speakeasy Society. And it reads, the Speakeasy Society is an LA-based immersive entertainment company creating intimate and epic experiences in unexpected places. We create 360-degree worlds, providing escape through total engagement, crafting a shared experience where audience interaction becomes a vital aspect of the performance. And you're succeeding. Like, we have really, truly loved your events. Now, you're currently in the middle of the Kansas collection.
Yes.
And we are here also to talk about something which Mike and I are very, very fond of, the Johnny Cycle.
Yes, yeah.
So, what is coming up with the Johnny Cycle? Please update us.
Well, we're very excited to say that we have secured a location for the Johnny Cycle, and we have our dates, and the tickets are actually on sale now with the release of this podcast. So you can go to our website at www.speakeasysociety.com and get the tickets there. We'll be running every weekend of May, Thursday through Saturday, at the Mountain View Mausoleum in Pasadena. So that's very exciting. It's going to be a great home for that piece. Yeah.
Mike and I just lit up.
If you heard that thunk, that was our jaws hitting the floor.
The Speakeasy Society, you guys have been around since, I believe, what, 2012?
2012, yeah. We did our, we're actually all graduates of CalArts, and we did our first show in a bathroom at the school, and that was the Weird Sisters. It was kind of a witch-centric version of the Macbeth story, and we did it there. It was a lot of fun. People seemed really excited about it, and we took it from there to Los Angeles. We had the opportunity to, we found a great space. Somehow these magical spaces just kind of occasionally walk up to us and say, hey, we're here, do you have anything? And so the Glendale Moose Lodge, which unfortunately is no longer open to the public, but at the time it was this strange and beautiful space, and it fit the piece really well. So we redid that down here, and that was kind of the beginning of the Speakeasy Society.
Our first official Los Angeles event.
That we actually were curating other artists into that as well. So we created an evening of performance called Suffering Fools there, which was great, of which our piece was one part. And that kind of launched us moving into the LA scene. Yeah.
And from there, we've created a number of pieces really exploring different size and shape of events. We did a show that was for an audience of about 14. It was about a 3.5-hour experience that included a full dinner.
That production was called Kitchen Bullet Sugar Blank.
Kitchen
Sugar Bullet Blank. So in my defense, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because that was actually the first piece that I saw by the Speakeasy Society. So I wasn't a part of the group then. I had worked with all of three of them in other performance venues and other theater pieces. My background is actually in music, so I'd usually been composing for these pieces. But I was one of the test audience for Kitchen, and the moment in particular that I always repeat is that they at one point placed me into a shower stall that had a glass door, and I got to watch from the shower stall as these two women were putting on makeup and just having a private conversation. And it was like one of the most voyeuristic but like impactful things that I had ever gotten to do in a theater moment. So after that, we were having drinks or something, and I was like, hey, you guys, if you need me for anything, please, please, please invite me along. So I got to do the music for the first iteration of Ebenezer, and then we kept working together, and I started writing with them, and then we did the second iteration of Ebenezer, and then after that is when I successfully lobbed onto the group.
And now Chris handles a lot of the writing of words and music for our pieces.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the great things actually about immersive. I feel like people have really strong responses to it. They either really love the experience or it's not for them. And I think that's something that's interesting about it. It's not for everybody, but I think everyone should give it a shot. And so I think some people, though, they really do have this very I know that the first time I experienced an immersive theater piece, it was profound. It was like, this is what I'm looking for right now. And that's not to say I don't love traditional theater and I don't love still making traditional theater, but there was something that felt really vital and important right now, and particularly important for an art form that's been having conversations about how it's dying for a lot of years. So I think
That's a very old conversation. People have been saying that for years.
And I think immersive theater is trying to address some of that and is really it focuses on the audience. It does, and not just entertaining the audience, but what is this larger experience they are having? How are they part of the conversation the show is having, not just a witness? And I don't know, I definitely know that's part of what drives all of us with making this work and part of what excites us about it. So
Julianne and I have been making theater together for several years before we started doing any immersive theater. And we were just having this conversation today on our drive over here about how important the audience is to what we make, and how the first question is always, how is the audience involved? What is their role in the piece? And that was something that we didn't think about as much when we were making traditional proscenium-style theater. And our view has switched completely. And because when we were watching theater, that's what we were craving. And when we both saw immersive shows, or big immersive shows for the first time, it really did. It felt like a spark was lit. And we both, I think it was Sleep No More was the first big thing that we both saw. We were in California. We both went back to New York. We saw it. And when we came back, we thought, we need to do this. It felt like we have to make a change. Everyone is ready for a change. People are craving this active role, and we don't want to sit in seats anymore and just watch.
That's been a sort of an evolution for our group as well, in terms of endowing the audience with specific roles. So the difference between having come to the first version of Ebenezer, which was very much a loose performance party, where you were guests at the Fezziwigs party, but beyond that, there wasn't really a specific role or function that you filled within the piece. Whereas if you came to the last version of Johnny, it was very clear who you were and how you were being interacted with. We've been more careful about endowing the audience with specific roles and tasks and responsibilities. So,
go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, one of the other things, I think Sleep No More comes up a lot in conversations about immersive theater. As it should. In some ways, it is the benchmarker that, at least for U.S. audiences, the most if people have had the opportunity to see it, right? Because it's run a long time, the scale of the audience. I do think one thing, though, that all of us walking away from seeing it, we loved it, but we were also like, how can text function in an immersive piece? Obviously, that's more of a dance piece. We obviously work with dance and physical parts of our shows, but we are really interested in text and how can you use text in a meaningful, deliberate way and do kind of deliberate storytelling with said text. And so that's definitely something that from the beginning we've been interrogating with the work, is how are we using text, and that we want text to be a strong part of the experience.
So as a creative team, several of you have both traditional theatrical and dance in your backgrounds, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
I definitely, when I did my undergrad, I went for theater and dance, but I was also a competitive figure skater for many
Wow.
years. That's actually how I got into acting, was I realized I liked the performance aspect way more than the athletic aspect. and it just kind of naturally led that way. So movement is really important to me. I always am an advocate for including movement in our works when it's right. So it doesn't come up in all of our pieces, but in larger scale pieces like Johnny, there is usually a place for it. In smaller scale productions like the Kansas collection, where it's a little bit more intimate, so far we haven't seen any. We might, but it might be more of a social movement.
But it is, I mean, there is something that can be expressed through movement sometimes that cannot be expressed through text, this ineffable emotion transmitted through the human body rather than through words. But words are our primary mode of storytelling, I would say. Yeah.
The audience role, which you mentioned, Julianne, I detect that evolving with you guys, because the audience in Johnny the Cycle Part 1 behaved differently than in Part 2. And one of the things that, and now in the Kansas collection, you're asking different things of the audience. The experimentation that you're doing with that is really interesting. And one of the things that Johnny Part 1 was the first piece that I saw from you guys. I had heard about Ebenezer after it had finished. And but I actually met one of your company. And he said to me, yeah, I'm working with this group and we're doing sort of an immersive version of Johnny Got His Gun. And I just lit up because I knew Johnny Got His Gun. So I immediately, that day, was like, I have to see this. I have to get a ticket. But in that piece, you sort of used the audience as a vessel for part of what was going on in the show. Like, they became different people throughout the show. And one of the things that I thought happened in that show was it added to almost a dreamlike quality, and that show was much about the flashback and the memories that Johnny has. So, an actor would say a line and ask the audience member to echo it, and it created this weird dreamlike vibe, this atmosphere of you are becoming part of the flashback. And it got deeper and deeper as the show went on. So that final sequence, which was a train ride, that final emotional room was devastating. And it was partially because we had echoed so much of what the emotion of the characters was. And then now that, in Johnny Part 2, you became an active participant in numerous versions of those scenes. So, can you comment on Johnny Part 3? What is coming? Are you deliberately trying to change the audience role again? How are you developing that?
Interesting. Well, I mean, first I would say that you are right to notice that we are constantly trying to sort of evolve and interrogate the way in which we engage audience members. No two of our pieces have really had all of the same control mechanisms, because we're always learning and we're just expanding on all of this. So in Johnny Part 3, we are continuing to investigate Johnny's mode of communication as he now realizes that he is alive in this body and is trying to find a way to express himself. And we're also starting to take a look at aspects of Dalton Trumbo's own life, and particularly relating it to some of the House of Un-American Activities hearings. So we'll be evolving beyond the time frame of the Johnny book itself to also start to incorporate some of those elements into the piece to juxtapose Trumbo's life with the experience of Johnny as well. So
I think for Part 3, one of the bigger evolutions is this incorporating other elements besides just the novel, which we started doing in Part 2. Part 1 was very focused on the book itself. I would say actually we learned a lot between 1 and 2 about the form. And so in a lot of ways in 3, we're looking to strengthen the choices we started making in 2 with that. While we're always looking to interrogate form and audience interaction, I also think we always are trying to do what is best for the piece and what suits the experience and story we want to tell. So we don't do it differently just to do it differently or just because it would be novel. We really want to do what's going to support the experience we want the audience to have for that piece.
And I think for Johnny 3, we are really working with the idea of even more intensely letting that audience member experience what it would be like to be Johnny.
We made a decision pretty early on in the process for Johnny 1 that just like the book, everything is in Johnny's head. And so things may start to warp and bend with who other people are or who you feel like you are in that particular moment. And like we mentioned, time is going to start to smear throughout part 3. But the idea is that for all 3 of the cycles, you are in Johnny's mind. Mm-hmm. That is always a consistent thing with the Johnny cycle.
And much like the book, part of what's interesting is in that state, the lines between reality and dream are unclear for him. How do you know when you're asleep or awake if you can't open your eyes, if you you don't have these facilities to engage with where the world is actually at. So I think that's what's exciting is there are moments, is this really real? Am I dreaming this? And part of it is for the audience to have to figure that out as well, much like Johnny has to parse through that in the book.
And in the foreword to the book, Trumbo gives this wonderful introduction in later prints where he says, all these people keep asking him to update it so that it would be about this particular war, about this particular war. And he ends it with this wonderful line where he says, I've left it as it is to see what it was, or to see what it is. Mm-hmm. I've left it how it is basically what he's trying to say. And so we felt it was important, too, that in this breaking of time that we acknowledge that, because time has moved on since World War I, and there have been other battles that have been fought.
And that thematically is definitely something that you'll see in part 3, is though it's kind of the machine and the cycle, and mm-hmm. so in many ways, if you do read the book, there are these forewords, and you can see from war to war kind of the responses, and sometimes people feel differently about the book based on the motivations of said war, but again, in many ways, it does feel like we're trapped in this cycle, and that there is this sort of war machine pushing us back into battle again and again, and we're sort of left with the same consequences. And there, is kind of this question of, can we ever break out of it? Is this inevitable?
And particularly given the cheerful ending of the book, there is a question of how long is Johnny going to be left there in this state, ignored, and are we ever truly going to learn the lessons that he's trying to impart? So,
what drew you guys to Johnny Got His Gun? Why that piece?
Well, I read the book in high school, and it was something that just infected my mind. I couldn't get rid of it. The images and the ideas, and thinking about the experience of what it would be like to be in that space. It was one of the most profound things that I'd ever read as a high schooler. And when I got to college, I started experimenting with more experimental theater forms, and read a lot about some of the happenings and early work of Richard Schechner and the Performance Group and Dionysus in '69 and all of these amazing performance events that seem to be sort of relegated to the past. And I started thinking about, what are the ways that we can bring this into a contemporary context? And Johnny was always kind of in the back of my head. So actually in my undergrad thesis, I experimented with some sensory deprivation for audience members with this idea of, first you come in blindfolded, but then as you're standing there in the blindfolds, a bank of lights are coming up in front of your face so you can feel the heat on your skin, and then the lights are taken off and the blindfolds are taken off and yet you're still blind. And that was all kind of drawn from the experience of that book. So then when we all got together and started working with each other and said, all right, well, we're going to make this a thing. What are some ideas for upcoming pieces? I said, all right, you're going to think I'm crazy, but there's this book. And I really think that we can make a piece out of it. And Julianne, I think at first begrudgingly, said, fine, I'll pick it up and I'll read it. And then cut to a week and a half later or something, because you tore through it.
Yeah, but it was funny. I literally read the first section, maybe 10 pages in. I'm texting Matthew, What did you make me read?
You're right. We have to do this, and so we put it on the list. But we figured it would be another 2 or 3 years before we would really have the bandwidth to try to create something that ambitious, because we knew it was going to be a challenge.
And we had other pieces that we were working on at the time that we thought were going to come up much sooner.
Right, and then.
But as I mentioned earlier, spaces sometimes kind of find their way to us. We had the chance to see the Pasadena American Legion, and it's a unique and beautiful space, and they were interested in letting us use it to do a show, and that just seemed like the natural, like we had wanted to do this piece. It was kind of on the back burner, and here was the moment where it's like, this is the space to begin it. Now, the space is not a huge space, and that was definitely, when I say begin it, our initial idea was to do a singular show. But then we realized there was just so much within the book and so much we wanted to explore. And I do think there's something with when you create immersive theater, it takes longer. You can't fit as much in because you're having to create the space for the audience to engage with it, which takes a little longer than maybe a traditional just scene would. And so we realized we could try to squish everything into this 1 hour-long experience, or we could liberate ourselves of that. And that's where this idea of the trilogy was kind of born.
And the book itself is divided into 2 sections. There's the dead and then the living. But we figured that we actually needed 3 in order to address these 3 individual spaces that we identified within the book. This idea of the dreamlike past, the flashback that you were referring to. Then something that's actually excised from the book, which is this idea of the war itself, of the explosion, of the event, because that actually is hardly addressed at all in the book. And then finding this space of, okay, now here I am, here's my new reality, now what? What do I do? So that's what we're moving into in the chapter 3, or I'm sorry, part 3.
Yeah. And is that how the multiple tracks were born? Just from the logistics of there was so much? Or did you go in with the intention all the time to have... I guess how was the decision made to have the multiple tracks?
I think the multiple tracks within the piece, yes, on one level, there's just a lot of material, and we were very inspired. On another level, we are interested in creating variations within the experience, because we think that means after the show, you can come together with other audience members and share your experience, and you haven't had the same experience. And that's something, I think, again, in our initial experiences with immersive theater, we were really excited about, where it was like, wow, you leave this show and you're talking about it for 3 or 4 hours with the people you potentially attended it with. And that's so different than I felt like I was going to see like a play with a friend, and afterwards we'd talk about for like 10, 15 minutes, but then we kind of moved on to whatever else. And I found that just the conversation it generated, that's part of what we're looking to do, right? We're trying to create space to create these very immersive and intense emotional experiences for the individual, but then to create community out of those individual experiences.
And also interested in investing in repeatability and sort of replay value, to use a video game terminology, because you were able to come and see the second Johnny piece 3 times, is that correct? And had fairly different experiences.
I repeated only, other than the wraparound opening and closing of the show, I only repeated 1 sequence, which is stunning to me. I literally can't wrap my brain around how you guys did that.
It took effort.
but I do think it's...
Seriously, I understand, I get how much work you guys put into that show, and it's astounding, because I know that show was a monumental creation. It was like, and I applaud you guys, and I thank you guys, because I know Mike and I both had wonderful, extremely emotional experiences at that show.
Yeah, and that's one of the things for me, because you're exactly right. The after talk is just as much as part of the show as the actual show is, and there are meetups happening almost after every show nowadays in LA. Like, people like, okay, I'm going to this bar, let's meet there and talk about it, because some need a drink after some things they encounter, some just want to like geek out about it. And that's one of the best parts, because it's like, oh my God. And then I went into this room and the guy in the closet, and like, wait, what? And that's what happened with Russell and I. And, the fact, like, I'm pretty new to. Oh, when I saw Johnny, I was pretty new to the multiple tracks. So when I went back a second time, and I I had emailed like, hey, I'm gonna come back. Do I need to do anything? And they're like, nope, just thanks for letting us know. And when I went and I told Lyman, I mean, not Lyman, sorry.
You're crossing the stream.
Yeah. But I told him, hey, I emailed. This is my second time. He's like, we know, don't worry. And it's like, what? And my head exploded at that point, and I got a completely different show. And exactly what Russell just said, it's like it was mind blowing.
We do try to, when we're making the multiple tracks, we're assuming people are only going to see it once. And so we do want to make sure that whatever track you fall on, that you are having hopefully the best experience possible, and that we are thematically creating a consistent experience.
And that it's a complete narrative
Yes.
experience, right? So it's not, you're not going to go through a track and then not understand it because you missed a certain element. We want to make sure that it's a complete piece for you.
And I think you succeeded in that with Johnny Part 2, because after my first time through, I reflected on, there was some talk of the soldiers in the kitchen and what they had to do and what they had to learn. And then elsewhere in the show, I sort of caught glimpses of another sequence, which I didn't go through, but it connected to what I was told and what I learned in the kitchen. So thematically, it completely off in the distance, those troops exist, and off in the distance, those troops are going through hell. So it made perfect sense that I caught a glimpse of that, but I didn't experience it myself. So I think you succeeded very well on that. If I had only gone to Johnny Part 2 once, it would have still been one of my absolute favorite immersive shows I've ever gone to.
Thank you.
That's great. It's great to hear.
We definitely, too, with the multiple tracks, tried to take advantage of returning to spaces. And this is just tying into because you guys mentioned the closet scene, and we both got to see what's called closet number 3. There were actually 3 different closet experiences that people could have, but only one person got to experience each one a night. So it's one of those things where it's like, just on the off chance that you'd be talking with another person, you might be like, oh, I was in the closet. But then if you start talking, then you find out your experience in the closet was actually another layer down.
Yeah, somewhere along the way, I did hear about somebody I had that experience exactly with someone else. I'm drawing a blank on who it was, but yeah, and also because it happened very early in their show, I believe.
Yep.
And that was when we started wait, how could it wouldn't make sense early? Wait, what?
Right.
And we had that conversation oh yeah, you had something very different than I did.
Yeah.
So the multiple tracks, I literally am fascinated by the structure of how you control that. Just as the logistics of your show. Is it timed from the actors' performances, or do you have a stage manager calling cues?
We do not have a stage manager calling cues.
What a quaint idea.
I appreciate that it seems magical and smooth. It's definitely that's a space that we're just running with it. We set these things up. We've timed them. Timing in immersive theater is a really strange beast because there's this audience variable, and it can really change how fast or slow things happen. But we try to create these checks and balances that will, if something gets hiccuped, or if performers kind of get caught with a group of audience members and can't move it forward, that will hopefully push it forward or force it forward. But again, it's a lot of checks and balances built into the performance, and then there's a lot of just...
There's always a little extra content.
Yeah, we do build a fair amount of extra content where it's like, because we don't want it to be pointless filler. That's definitely a big thing we try to avoid. We really try to avoid putting actors in a space where they just have to improv, because again, we want to be controlling the narrative you're getting. We're really trying to use text deliberately and to tell a specific story. So we create a fair amount of content that people might never hear.
I think
as a safety space.
Yeah, it's funny when actors receive scripts from us for the first time. Chris will walk people through it, and they'll say, "What are these 5 monologues? I don't understand why I have 5 monologues for this moment." We say, "Memorize them all, please.
Yeah.
Thank you."
It's definitely one of those things where in the moment you're like, there's so much, I'm never going to need this. But then there will be that one person who will say that one thing, and that 5th monologue is like the perfect response to it. Yeah. So then you gotta go with that.
We like giving actors options,
Oh, yeah.
too. That's the other thing. Because there is this moment of interaction, and you want to be responsive. We don't want them to, again, completely go off script and improv, so we love having them to have multiple choices and be able to respond with something that's written, but that feels right based on what that
and we don't
audience
want it
member
to be
said.
so rigidly on the rails that it feels like we're not able to give you that kind of individualized attention and response, because I think that that's something that, based on the scale of the pieces that we're creating right now, we are able to be pretty nimble and individualized, both in terms of the moments within the piece itself and in terms of what you were speaking about of dealing with people who are coming for multiple iterations of something and making sure that they do have a unique and different experience, because that matters to us. The making sure that the audience experience is magical every time and that there are fresh surprises and new angles to approach our pieces. So.
And I do think, a lot of it, too, is we have great performers, and they bring so much to the piece, not just in their skill as actors, but also just their
presence,
and their nimbleness to handle stuff as it comes up. But as people who've seen multiple shows with us, we do have performers who we work with regularly. We are always trying to fold in new performers, too, but definitely, I feel like our performers have grown in the form as we've grown with the form as a company. And so in many ways, they're, as we learn things, they are learning things as well. And it's been really great to be able to work with that knowledge, knowing that they have it, and it allows us to develop more complicated situations, more intricate interactions, and
a shorthand of vocabulary from past pieces where we can say, okay, well, we're going to set up a moment sort of like this thing from Johnny One, but we're tweaking it to involve this.
Because I do think, it's a different performative style, so you can have a great actor who actually really struggles in the form, and it's definitely not for everybody. We've worked with people before who are fantastic actors, and they were like, okay, I did that, and I love you guys, but I don't think this is for me, and that's we definitely respect that, because it is a much different experience as a performer to be sitting, a foot away from an audience member who's been given permission to speak and to move and to touch, and
as much as we say we don't want actors to improv, there's always an element of that. There has to be. And it's a delicate balance of responding and kind of veering off the script and coming back to the script.
We kind of are like, improv your way back to the script. That's always do what you need to do to respond in the moment, but always try to pull it back to the story.
And especially for a show like Johnny, where the content is very intense and is very serious, I think that's very important to us. There are other shows that we have where actors are much more responsive in the moment and have more freedom. I would say there are moments in the Kansas collection where actors have more freedom, but they are also, at this point, so invested in their character that they always know exactly where to go.
Would you also consider The Stronger to be one of those pieces that has more flexibility?
Ooh, that's interesting. There are points about The Stronger that, yes, they have to be much more flexible, but there are other points that have to be very rigid. There are two actors in The Stronger, and one of them has much more flexibility than the other. As the character with more flexibility, you do have to very much respond to who is sitting across from you as the audience member. I always talk about, as a performer in The Stronger, it's such an amazing piece to do. Because as you meet that audience member, you get a vibe off of them in the first 10 seconds. And your performance changes based on who that person is. So you might do that show 10 times that night, and you have the same script, but it is always going to be different. Because you have to see who shows up, and you have to be the right person for that person, if that makes sense. So the script is the same, and you will always come back to the script, but the feeling behind it, the intention behind it, the interaction that you have, it could drastically change based on that audience member.
Yeah, and I think that that's one element when we speak about the skills that our actors are learning, is that ability to scan someone emotionally, right? And to try to get a sense of how you can best interact with that person to give them the most positive experience possible. So.
Yeah. And I do think there is a first time experience for performers. I feel like post a lot of people's first show they do with us, it's like, wow, that very first moment where I realize like I'm here with this audience member right now, and it is just the two of us, and that there is a weight and a responsibility, and just the power of you're looking in their eyes and they are there.
That's one thing that I love about The Stronger. Not to give too much away, but there is a moment at the end of the piece that very much is just about you and that person and a real conversation. Mm-hmm. That is not a very scripted conversation. That is a true, honest moment of connection between those two people, and that always makes me excited. I love that part of The Stronger, to have that moment with each person each time.
I want to clarify something real quick. We've been talking about these shows. Mike and I are familiar with your work and your shows. The Stronger is a show which, as you mentioned, was 2 characters, and you perform that in a very public space. The audience member comes and meets you in a public space, and the show takes place as lots of stuff in a very real environment is taking place around you. Johnny, however, is location specific, and it is more of a, structured is not the right word, but I'll go with that. And it's more of a performance thing where the interactive aspect of that comes from each individual scene and the way it's structured. Johnny, in case you haven't gathered this, is about a wounded soldier who's dealing with the memories as he is lying in a hospital bed. And The Stronger is about a relationship where you suddenly learn much more than you ever may be expecting to from a stranger about the relationship.
Yes.
So I just wanted to clarify that for our listeners as to what shows we're talking about.
And we do a lot with kind of adaptation and inspiration from other sources. So The Stronger is based on Strindberg's The Stronger. We've definitely, obviously with the immersive element, it's had a lot of changes, and we've made it very contemporary. It's now crafted to capture kind of the world of Los Angeles.
And there are different versions of The Stronger.
I was going to say, and like the track thing, depending when you go and who you get, you're getting a different experience. I'd say I think we have about 5 working versions of The Stronger.
Wow, because they've been
now.
custom tailored to the actresses who are playing those roles.
So I have to ask, have you ever considered doing an all-male version of The Stronger?
We've been asked about we've been asked about
wow,
it.
There was this weird moment around the show.
Yeah.
It's like,
it's definitely come up. We've had people. I do think we'd obviously have to create a new script for it.
Yes.
So the dynamic and the form of the interaction, completely, you could do that with 2 men. But I do think the nature of what happens right now, those scripts are crafted, and they're crafted for a female experience. There is of course a male version of that, but I do think it's it would need to be created as a deliberate and specific experience. It definitely would need a new script.
well, as someone who's gone through The Stronger, I found that fascinating. And as Mike said, we have the conversations afterwards. It's like I hung out, at a bar nearby, and multiple people who were going through The Stronger that night, we all met later, like, okay, what was it like for you? What was the most intense? What was the most interesting? And one of the things that came up is like it would have to be a very different dynamic between the 2 characters if you did explore that. But we thought it would be a really interesting dynamic to see explored.
Well, and that's something I actually find really interesting about The Stronger as a piece, is what your response as an audience member is as a woman versus as a man going through the piece.
I was horrified. I was so embarrassed, and like, I was.
and not that, obviously everyone has a really individual experience of it, so it doesn't need to be gendered, but there is something, I think, as a man being invited into this moment between 2 women that might be different than the experience as a woman being invited into this moment between 2 women would be. And to me, it's been interesting when audience talk to me about it, about how that's different for them, and a lot of that's based on their own experiences.
I think it's interesting too, as we talk about this and we talk about Johnny. I'm just reflecting on, how it can be sometimes hard to communicate to people that this is also fun.
Yeah. Oh, that's so funny. Mike and I had a moment in a recent podcast where it was like, wait, Mike, we have to remind people that this is really a blast.
Yeah.
We really had a great time.
I think this question of fun is a really exciting topic. Like, what is fun, and what does fun look like? And for me, you know, these can be really emotional experiences. I mean, fun is having an experience that takes me away from my day job and my computer and gets me out of my apartment and off the couch and puts me in a space to experience something. And so I do think it is fun. And maybe fun isn't the right word. It's exhilarating, right? Like, it's exciting. It's powerful. And let's be honest, a lot of life is gray and kind of hangs on a level, and that's great. I mean, we got to do that to survive, but I do think that's what this offers, and particularly if you're open to it. And I do think, you know, as an audience member, you are where you are when you come into the piece, and you are who you are. But if you can be open to the experience, I do think there are rewards to be had, and to let go in some ways of what you think it's going to be or what you want it to be, and to just be open to the clues you're being given, to let yourself not be scared, to not worry about doing it wrong. Again, we really it's really important to us, the audience. We really want to take care of our audience, and sometimes when audiences don't get the clues, we generally put that on us. We didn't set it up correctly. We didn't make it clear, and that clear is a tough part. We want it to be subtle, right? We don't want to tell you what to do, but we need to tell you what to do. So how can you build that into the experience in a way that it feels like part of the story, part of the world, but also makes it clear to them what are the rules of this dynamic and engagement, and you know, the audience is vital to it. It is the key. Without
these shows would not exist without an audience. When we try to run and rehearse and there's no one else in the room but the actors, it's
sad.
It just in no way captures what actually the experience is.
Yeah.
And maybe for some of your listeners that's less of an issue, but definitely in the past, when you describe the concept behind Johnny and behind the Johnny cycle, I think people say, "Oh, that sounds a little intense," or "I don't know that that's really for me." And yes, I mean the themes and the experiences, some of them are very intense and emotional, but there's a payoff, you know, and I think it is something that feels very satisfying to be a part of. It's not a haunt, right? It's not something that we're asking people to engage in any kind of like frightening or taxing. I don't know, but no taxing physical tasks or anything of that nature. It's you know, but it is an emotional journey. And there are people who said that they, you know, oh well, that's too much for me for whatever reason, whether they're a vet and they have some PTSD symptoms and things of that nature, and I don't think I can put myself in that position. That's fine. But
have you encountered that with Johnny?
We have actually. Well, with audience members who chose not to become a part of it, or had to bail.
Yeah, we had a couple people leave from Johnny, and in most cases they were someone that was brought to the show by someone else,
and they maybe didn't understand exactly what the experience would entail.
Yeah. So that on when they left, you know, again, we're not going to obviously stop anyone from leaving. We really do try to take care of our audience. That's really important to us. That we want them to feel like that the machine is there to support them. We are not trying to put them in dangerous or compromising situations. If you need to step out, we understand that we're only checking in to make sure you're okay, not because we're questioning your choice.
And it's not always comfortable, but it is always safe. Right?
But but most often when people would step out of Johnny, it was just that they didn't know what they were getting into, and they didn't feel like they were ready for it, and which I think is a completely valid reason. That being said, I also feel though Johnny is something that on the outside can sound I think, like potentially a scary or daunting piece to face. I do think, though, that once people are in it, again, it's it's very emotionally intense. It's also not, again, it's a lot of it's theatrical, and it's finding different ways to express it. So, the battlefield, it's not a haunt. It's not that there are bloody corpses scattered around a room that you're
wading through.
Yeah. It's not, the first scene of Saving Private Ryan.
Right.
You're not suddenly in that. It's it is in many ways a more dreamlike world and kind of the physical presentation of it.
We love telling stories, and the fact that the audience want to hear these stories. That connection is the thing that keeps us going. It's like, thank you for listening to our stories.
Yeah.
This is how we want to tell these stories.
And as we were driving over here, we just finished our most recent remount of The Key last night, and I was saying, God, this show is so much fun. It's so much fun to perform. I love being in that connection with other humans and being surprised and having that live dynamic. It's exhilarating from a performer perspective as well.
And I get surprised myself. I went through The Key again, not this remount, but the remount before, and it had been a while since I'd seen it. And going through it, I was kind of taken aback. I was like, wow, this really is a moment. And even though I know the performer and I know the script, I know everything, and even within that, it was even knowing everything. It was like, oh, this is a real moment. Wow, even knowing everything, I can still appreciate that I don't get this all the time.
The Key is so much fun to perform. I was just thinking about last night, and like The Stronger, everyone that walks into that room, they also create half of the performance in a way. So it's not just us as actors. It's so much of it is on them in a great way, and I love people's reactions, and they're always so different, and what people know and what people don't know, and how that affects the way the story rolls for those 5, 10, 15 minutes is, it's always shocking and surprising. And
in some ways it's hard to perform in more traditional theatrical settings now, or for film. It's because it doesn't have that charge. There's something that is. It's
their first time. Yeah. They are truly experiencing it in the moment, and as an actor, that's what you're looking to create, a real, true. This is the first time it's happening for me, and when I'm across from you and it is really the first time that you're experiencing that makes my job as an actor so much easier, and it does feel real in a way that, if I'm on stage with another actor in a more proscenium setting, you have to work a lot harder to make that
and
true.
It's the 70th time you've performed that scene, as opposed to
but
this is the first every time.
And that's what it feels like with things like The Key and The Stronger. Even though I have done both of those shows more times than I can count, it feels like every time you start, it is the first time when that person walks in the room. You don't know truly what is going to happen.
I think going back to the word play, because that's something that's come up on this podcast between Mike and myself. That's the word I always go back to. And play can leave you in tears. And play can leave your heart broken. But play can also be exhilarating, is the word you used. And so I think that exploration, the other word that Mike and I quite often go back to, just exploration. That's the way I started the podcast today, because that's what you guys have given us as fans.
Well, and I think it's interesting because, again, that space post-show where you can talk about your experiences, it's so important and so exciting. And this idea of creating community, I think, the arts want to help foster community and discussion. But what's interesting, too, is I'm always like, but also don't judge your experience compared to, well, you want to mine other people's experience, don't judge your own experience if it looked or felt different than someone else's. Because I think about your personal nature, right? Your friend was more talkative, you weren't. That doesn't mean your experience was any less, or that you didn't participate correctly, or that they participated incorrectly. And I think about sometimes, I remember in a piece once, it was this question of what's the worst thing you've ever done? And some people treated that as a confessional space, And some people didn't answer, but that the person who doesn't answer doesn't mean they don't think about it, that it doesn't create the space for them to ask that of themselves. And I think whether you share or not, it is an equal experience within that. And I think that's one of the unique aspects of this for audiences.
My family lives on the other side of the country, over in Maryland. So this summer was the first chance that they got to come and see one of the Speakeasy shows. And so my mother kept saying that she was worried about it because, it's such an intense topic, and she was worried about that, and she's never done immersive theater before, and like, what if I do it wrong? And so I had to keep explaining to her, I was like, the only way to do immersive theater wrong is to try to break the world. Like, as long as you're just in it, then you're fine. Just answer honestly and truthfully, and it'll be great. So I finally got her to do it, and she told me afterwards that in the final dance sequence, Johnny 2 ends with a New Year's party, and there's a dance, and she ended up dancing with Kane, which, by the way, would make a great title for a novel. That's a gift for everyone. Dancing with Kane.
Or an indie rock band.
Yeah, true. But she was dancing with Kane, and there's a moment when the dance breaks apart and the characters start talking to you separately, echoing words that are going throughout the whole room about, what progress does a wheel make. And my mom said that in that moment she had, like, one-on-one connection with Kane, and she was like, I was on the verge of tears when that was happening. So that's my story about, like, that's the type of experience you can expect. It's not daunting, it's not impossible, but it is intense and emotional.
But it's interesting because there are also moments where it's fun and joyful, strangely.
And playful.
Yeah, absolutely.
You were dancing with Kane 2 seconds ago.
Yeah. And that is something I think that will also happen in Johnny 3. There will be intense, difficult moments, but I love those moments, those moments of play and freedom.
I think about in Johnny 2 the basic training, the first kitchen scene with the pillows.
Yes.
And like, it was fun. It's a fun scene in its own way, and so I do think...
Until you realize what you're doing.
Until you realize what what's actually happening, but again, that it's playful, the interactions, and also it's easy, right? I feel like that was a scene where you had a specific role, you were asked to do specific tasks. Anyone could achieve said tasks. They weren't hard tasks to complete, and there's something fun and satisfying about doing them.
Yeah, and you became part of the group. I think the audience that I was with, the few of us that were in the room, we bonded. Mike spoke about this on the podcast when we talked about that show, of the weird aspect of it's fun, it's playful, you're interactive, and then you realize, wait, they're teaching me really dark, violent stuff, but in this weird, participatory, almost playful manner. So it just adds to the emotion and the thought that you give the show.
And this is going to come off so wrong, and I don't mean it to sound this way, but how cool is it that your mom was on the verge of tears?
It was awesome.
Like, the fact that, like, everyone wants to make their parents proud. Like, I mean, for you and for, like, the team as creators, knowing that you affected someone's parents, like, that much, like, I mean,
oh yeah,
how does that make you feel?
Awesome. Yeah, because it was my mother, my brother, and my father who all came out, and I loved it because I didn't get to meet up with them until way later because they saw it on the very last night, so we all had gone out to have a moment of, like, we did a thing, yay. And then I went back to the hotel just to catch up with them, and they had already gone to bed, but they left this note for me where they had actually charted out minute by minute what scenes they saw, like charting out so because they all went on different tracks, and that was just that made my day.
I loved
cool.
seeing that note.
It was
that
so
was
exciting.
amazing.
And how cool too that you're representing these different generations coming to see the show. Because that's something that fascinates me as well, is that it's not all young people coming to see the piece, that this is something that is accessible to people of a variety of ages. We have several people that are regulars at our pieces who must be in their late 60s, early 70s, I would say, and
we have people who bring their children.
Yeah, and we have people who bring their kids. So
awesome.
So the span is wonderful. The only barrier to entry really is that most of our shows are somewhat mobile, so
right.
it can be difficult for people who don't have a fair amount of mobility, but that's something where we try to work on and address.
Yeah. And I was going to say that's definitely something too. If someone reaches out to us about it, we again, based on what the show is, if we can find a way to make it work, we will. In Johnny 2, we definitely created a bit of an alternate track to accommodate someone who was just a little less mobile on their feet than normal. And again, you know, I think that alternate track that was created very spur of the moment still had a fair amount of integrity to it. So,
I have a question about Johnny 2 for you guys. When you enter the church, you're told you're Johnny, and then you have to sign in. And one of the things Russell and I were just like, oh my God, about is how many people sign their name as Johnny.
Yep.
And when you saw that at the end of the night, or I think you were actually at the desk watching that,
yeah.
like, but did it just make you smile every time someone signed Johnny? It was like, oh my God, they get it.
It did, yeah. And I mean, that was pretty amazing. And I think having that portal and that initial opportunity for people to buy in was really important, because not that if they didn't sign their name as Johnny, they were going to be a bad audience member, but that was an indicator that someone was really invested in the experience. They understood their role, which was felt like we could pat ourselves on the back for that for a second.
well,
And
I have to admit, I didn't assume that anyone would do that. And after the first opening night, when that happened, it was like, oh, and going forward, that is, I think everyone signed in as Johnny for the whole run. But that was not something I was assuming would happen.
yeah, we still get surprised, and we learn things from audiences all the time that inform our work moving forward. So. Yeah.
We are known for making changes during shows. We do a lot of, obviously, play tests, and we bring people in to try things out. But things happen, and things go in unexpected ways, and we like to be open to making changes if those occur. So.
Well, and I think one of the challenges that we run into is we are a small company. Often what that means is that our runs have to be somewhat shorter because we're borrowing space with limited capital, and that means that sometimes when we are being responsive and we're making adjustments to the piece, that is during the course of an actual run. For this Johnny piece, for Johnny 3, we're going to have a preview weekend. So for people who are really excited about coming to see the piece at its outset, we have that available, and then we'll have 3 weekends of regular run after that as well. So trying to a 4-week run is feels like an accomplishment for us in some ways, trying to give as many people an opportunity to see the piece as possible, because we're looking at about audiences of 30 for each of these performances as well.
And will you have multiple shows per night?
Not at this point. We're not thinking that we'll be able to do that, just based on the logistics of the space.
And
okay.
by not trying to do 2 shows in one night, it also means that the experience itself can be a little longer. And
right.
That's definitely something that in, obviously Johnny 2 was longer than Johnny 1, and even with Johnny 2, we were, I think we probably had another 10 minutes in that show, but because we had planned it to do these 2-night shows, we kind of had to shave a little bit. So I think on this last one, we really want to, because this is the end, we are only doing 3 parts, I think we want this to be able to stand without having any last, if only we could have, or
we want to feel
one
full,
more.
complete in our circle of the exploration.
Yeah, so.
Because it feels important, and it's been an emotional journey for us as well. So to tie this up and do it right and do it well and really do service to the text and do service to the audience who's accompanying us on this journey, it does feel like we have a little bit of a mandate, of a mission here for this 3rd piece.
So there's been a lot of experiences in LA within the past year that are bringing more and more people into this immersive world, and you have a lot more and more people coming to your shows now. With Johnny 3, do people need to see the previous incarnations for the show to make sense to them?
No, you don't need to see the other pieces. It will be a standalone piece. For people who have seen 1 and 2, we're definitely integrating characters and themes, and you will definitely see parts from 1 and 2 reemerge in a new context. But 3 is definitely a standalone piece as well. And so I think it's definitely, you don't need 1 and 2 to have full access to the emotional experience.
I think we were successful in that between Johnny 1 and Johnny 2. I really felt like you did not need to see Johnny 1 to have a full experience in Johnny 2. And we definitely plan to have it be that way for Johnny 3.
Now, that being said, I think it is useful to have some knowledge of the story of Johnny Got His Gun, or some knowledge of Trumbo's life in general, just because you're going to have a deeper experience if you have an awareness of some of those things. So I think that there were people who came in completely fresh to Johnny 2, knowing nothing about the book, knowing nothing about the story, and they were still able to have a full experience, but maybe did not pick up on some of the elements that people who were a little more well versed in those things would have.
Which I think is, I mean, that's like Sleep No More.
That's
If
everything,
you
yeah.
if you know Macbeth and is it Rebecca?
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, you're gonna pick up on more things than someone who isn't aware of both. When I went through it the first time, I went with someone who didn't know anything about the show going in, and well, they did know Macbeth. They didn't know that had been a source material, and so based on what they encountered, they didn't even realize that they were in, like, their concept of the experience had nothing to do with Macbeth. Like, walking away, they weren't like, this is kind of like Macbeth. It was like they had created a completely different narrative about vampires, but again, they had a great experience, and for them, it was still an amazing thing, but they just had a different entry into it.
And I bet the show worked.
Yeah, it definitely still worked for them, but once they were clued in that, you know, Macbeth was a part of it, it was like, oh... and so they were happy with their initial interpretation, and they were also happy with their more informed interpretation.
And this goes back to a sort of an element of show design that we've been talking about a lot recently, which is how do you reward the people who are diving in deeper or doing extra investigation while still preserving the core experience for those who just want to come and see the show, and keep the integrity of that piece. Don't make it necessary for people to do a greater investment of time and energy, but do reward those that
different levels of experience,
Exactly,
right? That
yeah.
you should be able to go in with a base level, not knowing and having any prior experience, and really have a fulfilling evening. But then maybe there's a second tier for those who have been to Johnny 2 or have read the book, and their understanding is maybe on a deeper level, and then possibly even a third experience where it feels like, oh yes, I have had this full, everything has come full circle.
Especially for part 3, since we're breaking out of the more strict narrative of the novel itself and moving into more real world things, that helps it stand alone as well.
And I do think, though, at the core, we always want to guarantee the experience for the person who comes in with nothing, and that then there are these added levels. But again, we really do try to, you know, and I think different groups can approach them in different ways. Some people really start with the people who put in the most, right? They're crafting the most for them, and then it's, you know, what you get if you put in less. They're kind of sometimes okay with maybe that it is
a lesser
experience. And so we try to do the inverse of that, where we do want to really guarantee this solid base level experience, and then that that it's more bonus add-on stuff versus.
And that's something we've been playing with in multiple different ways. If you've been to a Speakeasy show in the past, you may have picked up a token or two along the way, and often that unlocks extra content in some way.
Creating your shows. And I've also attended the Hollow, which was a different location. And that was a dinner involving a show while dinner was going on, and then actual scenes before dessert was served. For the Johnny cycle, you now have this location. So what is, if you, and I realize I'm sort of asking for what might be secrets here. So I understand that I might not get a full answer to this question. How does the show come to be the show? Like, what is your creative process? You have this location. What are you tailoring for the creation? Are you going in with a full concept and adapting it, or are you adapting? How much inspiration is the location giving for the piece?
I mean, location is really important. So, like with Johnny 3, we knew we were going to do a third part of Johnny.
Right.
We had an idea thematically of what we want part 3 to cover and explore. truthfully, we need to know the space, though, before we even begin to create a script, because the space impacts how that piece is going to be structured, how the audience is going to move through it. So
at one time we were looking at 2 different spaces for Johnny 3, and they would have been very different shows if we had went in a different direction. And the space is something that always inspires us so much, and we create content based off of the space very often. We find such inspiration in the actual physical structures, that things that we probably would never have come up with if we didn't have that spark.
So a lot of times on a piece, we will do these kind of initial creative workshops, and sometimes those are done earlier before we have a space in mind, but we know we want to create something with this material or in this arena. And so that's kind of more free-flowing investigation space. But when we get towards knowing that we're going to put a show up, we need that space to really move it forward, and we definitely craft around the space.
And is it a matter of improvising sequences within the space, and then the words come as a result of that, or
no?
Or does it change every time?
It depends on the space, how much access we have to it, and what the experience is. But definitely, so like for Johnny 3, we won't be improvising in the space to necessarily create our scripted portions, but we will write those scripted portions based on ideas we have that are specific to that space.
So a lot of space visits and touring around and writing down inspiration, and then kind of going back to our rehearsal space with those images in our mind, and working with that idea while we try different ideas.
Because there's the scripts for these pieces are huge, and we create so much content. That's part of why we need the space. Is technically we could start writing before we have a space, but the reality is we'd probably have to do a fair amount of cuts and changes and rewrites, and given the bulk of text that gets generated, I think we want to be as certain as possible before we begin writing a scene.
For Johnny 2, there was a brief period where we weren't sure if the space was going to come through or not, and just because of time constraints, we started to write some stuff, and we ended up with 2 scripts for 2 mini shows. But then when we secured the space for Johnny 2, they just got completely nixed. So we have these 2 phantom scripts running around our G drive somewhere. But like that's what happens. It's like those scripts didn't work when we got the space. And when we got the space, it was so much better than what we had planned. It was like great.
It was an amazing
space.
And that being said, though, there's always something fun with those phantom scripts and kind of nuggets of ideas. It's always interesting where they reemerge or reappear. We've definitely had moments where something that was cut, we're making something else, and it's like, wait, that would be perfect here, or can we incorporate that idea or that structure into this new piece? And so in some ways no work is lost completely, but
and something too is we usually start with like 2 points and try to work together in the middle. Like we'll have an idea of like the themes or the what the scene we want is, and so in the workshops we'll ask the actors like use these things to try this out and like find a new way to have the audience interact. Like the whole pillow scene with the training stuff, that's how we arrived at that. We were like, we knew we wanted to do something with the training scene, and this one group messed around with pillows, and we were like, that's great. So then we rewrote that scene for the fact that they had done the pillows. So like we knew the scene was there, they improv'd a little bit, then we brought the script in.
I think that prompt was something about like basic training meets the bakery or something, so that's, that was...
We were like, do something like that.
Yeah.
And then the pillows.
So I do think that's an important aspect of it. We do have ideas of like what we want that scene to accomplish, like what is the overall action. A lot of times we have an idea of like, we know there's going to be 2 actors in it. These are the sort of characters we think they would be. So there's a lot of, again, because so much content has to be created, we do have to pretty early on come up with a pretty specific map of what we think all these moments are going to be, even though then the creating of them will take longer, and filling that out takes more time. But we do definitely roadmap a piece before we fully build it.
One thing, just mentioning about how the spaces will change the scripts, if you've ever been to the Mountain View Mausoleum in Pasadena, it's gorgeous, and it has hallways upon hallways upon hallways. And so one thing in particular that changed is we spent some time exploring the transportation, the moments of like you're going from here to there. What happens on the way?
How do you keep it active?
How do you keep it active?
Yeah.
And like if we had gotten a smaller space,
that would
not even be a concern. Yeah.
Right.
And I do think, as we make more shows, and again, we're learning with every piece as well, and we're definitely adapting and evolving our process. I think that's part of the joy in making it for us, hopefully. But I also think what's been exciting is I think, we're hitting a point where we've put enough on its feet and seen how it works that I think we do have some secure ideas in how things work and how they'll behave. And I also think we're starting to move to a point where we're also rediscovering simplicity in the work. How is this hallway poetic in itself? Thinking about Johnny 3 in the mausoleum and how, there's so much you can do in immersive theater, and there is a bit of a temptation, I think, sometimes to keep it busy and to make it complicated, and that we can ask audience to do this and this and this and this. But I think a lot of times some of the most profound moments are the most simple ones, and how can we really take that idea and use it in a powerful way? And I think I'm excited to see kind of what we can do with that in the third part of Johnny. The space is, as Chris mentioned, gorgeous, and it's poetic in itself. It's an experience, sans story, actors, performers, just to be there. So how can we deliberately take those elements and let them do some work themselves?
It's interesting, Julianne, what you were saying just sparked something for me too, talking about simplicity. And I think one of the essential elements of our work, and part of what is so attractive to me personally about immersive and this form, is the actual acknowledgement and awareness of another human body sharing that space with you. And we spend so much of our lives now, I think, moving through media filters and in some ways closing ourselves off from the realness of another human reaching out and touching your hand, and the electric quality of that when that's put into an entertainment context, I think is pretty undeniable. And I think that's something that is very exciting to me about the essentializing of the work, is coming back to that just core connection of someone looking in your eyes when they speak to you, because how infrequently does that actually occur?
So with your writing and the writing of multiple tracks, and there's ways to get one-on-ones and whatnot, how is the safety concern? Because when I was doing Johnny, I was led up to a room and then locked the door, and I was one-on-one with an actress. Now, granted, I like to think I'm not a crazy psycho, but what if, like, that was the one thing that went through my mind, like, what if there was someone that was a crazy psycho in that locked room with the actress?
So I was going to say, you weren't actually locked in, but now I'm remembering what room you were in, and I think they did lock the door. Maybe we shouldn't have them lock the door going forward. But it's definitely, we a lot of it is on the performer to read and handle the situation.
There are signs. As a performer, there are signs. And I think as you work more and more in this medium, you start to develop a radar for reading people. And I will say that we have been very lucky, and there have not been very many circumstances at all where we have felt like, ooh, this might be a little dicey.
Well, we check in with the performers too about their level of comfort and safety in a given situation, and I think that the worst situations that we've encountered, I mean, there was one time at Ebenezer, which involved a fair amount of drinking, where someone was basically hitting on one of the female performers, and then once, which I think was more just a point of confusion in Johnny 1, where there was a character who said "kiss me," but she's speaking to the other actor who is representing Johnny, but the audience member did not understand that. So,
and I think it's worth saying that actress knew that might happen,
yes.
Was prepared mentally for it. She, on some level, was surprised it didn't happen earlier in the run than that. And that audience member didn't do anything wrong.
No,
because ultimately we did set up and say that, and that's how they read it.
And I think we actually designed it with the thought, oh, that might occur, and wouldn't that be interesting? And she was okay with that. She had signed on for that.
I do think actually more often than not it's the reverse. I think audience are more hesitant and tentative and nervous about being in a room alone with the performer than because the performer does have more control. They know what's going to happen. As an audience member, you're walking into the unknown.
I think that is something that we run into more often, is that, and our concern is, will that audience member feel safe? And we definitely have talked to people whose experience was like, I did not feel comfortable alone in a room with an actor. And that happened during Johnny 2, and it was just that actor talking to you. Nothing physical happened, but can be a dangerous space for some people. That amount of intimacy of being in a small room with a person who's speaking about something that is very charged.
And I think it also partially goes back to what we were talking about earlier about people not wanting to break the game or break the show, break the experience. And I think that we try to set up social cues with each of the pieces that give you some idea of a code of conduct and behavior. And people have been very good about respecting that on the whole. So we try to establish the parameters early on so that you don't feel confused, you don't feel like you're making a mistake, and that the people that are coming to see our work are generally respectful and enthusiastic and want a good experience for themselves and for the performers, as do we. So,
and I think the one-on-one is definitely the space that I think the most can happen that people are nervous about because on either side. But again, I do think we try to take silent cues off the audience. If an audience member is really hanging back or seems especially nervous, we'll try not to pull them into something like that. That being said, though, we also try not to just reward the most eager or aggressive audience members, because I think that's an important. A lot of times people are like, "Well, just go for the person who's jumping up, ready to go." And
you should also talk about you as an audience member, Julianne, because I think you're an interesting case.
So I love immersive. I'm really into it, but I'm a pretty quiet audience member. I'll answer a question if I'm asked a question. My answers are pretty straightforward. I don't get very chatty. But I definitely want everything. I want to go into that one-on-one. I want to have that experience. But for me, I'm not looking to...
You're not going to push someone out of the way.
I'm not going to push someone out of the way. And also, once I'm in the experience, I'm also not going to try to become more of a performer within it. I'm not trying to step into the role of the actor. I'm just trying to fulfill my roles. So I'm actually I always remind, as we're going through, where I'm like, I'm ready for this experience in there, but I'm also not, I'm quiet about it. So it is that thing, like, you don't want to punish your more reserved, quiet audience members, because they could be as hungry for it as the more eager ones. And so I think,
as an actor, you have to kind of start to be able to assess, is this person just more reserved? Or are you seeing the cues of don't pick me?
Fear. Like, are you seeing fear? Because I do think fear is a thing that we do try to, like, if someone seems scared, because again, our experiences aren't about making you scared. That is not something we're trying to, that's not a focus of our work right now. It's not about creating scary experiences. Emotionally intense, sure, but so if someone seems really scared or fearful, like,
we're going to leave them with a larger group of people.
And in terms of the design, if you think about a situation like Sleep No More, because you're dealing with so many audience members, that is a case where the people who are the pushiest often can get the best viewing point or something of that nature, and we don't want to create an experience like that.
I've actually heard negative things about Sleep No More, particularly in the last year or so.
I think the culture of it has changed.
Yeah, the idea that, like, there are people literally elbowing each other out of the way because they've read somewhere that, I have to be here at a particular time. And Julianne, what you were saying about how you participate, being open, I think you're right. Genevieve, you just said something about, like, if you detect fear or if you detect uncomfortableness, it's like you have to respect that, and as an audience member, if for some reason I have that going on, I would like it to be respected. Usually hasn't happened with me because I'm very open, but what I think I share with you, Julianne, the same thing of, it's not that I try to perform if I'm in a one-on-one, but what I do is I'm just honest. I'm horrible at poker because I have no poker face. Mike has seen me play poker. That's the giddy Mike smile right there. That is the giddy Mike smile.
Seeing him at a casino playing poker is
Okay. So thanks, Mike. But so I'm just honest. I'm just like, literally, if you're affecting me, you will see me being affected. You'll see my fear. You'll see my tears. You'll see my attention. Whatever it is going on with me. And that's just me in general. I'm just open. And I will share with you guys that one of the things that happened at Johnny One for me is the second time through, I brought someone who was really eager and had never done an immersive piece. Completely the wrong format for her. She became extremely uncomfortable, wanted to leave halfway through the show. She didn't. She stuck it through because she's a trooper. She loves theater. But that was the realization, you were saying earlier that it's not the format for some people. And that was the realization that night. And it was fascinating for me to watch a friend of mine get so uncomfortable. And
it's interesting that you say that, because we have friends, who want to come support our work because they're our friends, and there's some that they've come to a couple shows, and at drinks afterwards it'll come out where it's like this form just really isn't for me, and I generally say to them, I'm like, that's great, you don't have to come. Like, the reality is it's a special sort of experience, and if it's not your deal, that's totally okay. And I think, it's good to push yourself, particularly if you've never had the experience before. I also think it's good to try it with different companies, because different companies handle the experience differently and take care of their audience in different ways, and the objectives are different. So I do think maybe if you've tried one company and that wasn't your experience, it might be worth trying another. But for some people, it isn't their thing, and that is totally okay. And I do think at a certain point, forcing yourself through it is doing yourself a disservice. And sometimes, depending on the dynamic of the show, it can hurt other audience experiences as well. Which I think is always an interesting thing with this idea of like the breaking the game method. And I always find that very interesting. For some audience, that's part of the excitement of it. And I always wonder about that, because in the end, they're missing out on this thing that's been crafted for them
and
very
possibly
carefully.
Disrupting the show for other patrons,
and possibly disrupting it for other patrons, which I am always kind of interested in what drives someone to do that. But again, I guess I always feel like too, like, rarely will breaking the game be as satisfying as you think it will be, and in the end, you're missing out on all the choices and work that were put into, I believe all the companies making immersive work, they're trying to craft an experience for you, an experience that you might not normally get to experience in your day-to-day life, and whatever your feelings are at the end of it, don't you want to give it a shot?
So, Russell, I have a question for you.
Yes.
We've been chatting for a little bit at this point. Do you think it's time to ask the question?
Yes, and you get to ask the question this time.
Okay, hold on.
I don't know if you guys have listened to many My Haunt Life podcasts, but there comes a time in most interviews when we have to ask the question.
Are you Team Snickers or Team Kit Kat?
Kit Kat!
Kit Kat, I have to say.
Okay.
Is it unanimous for us?
I'm so outnumbered.
Well, I'm allergic to peanuts, in fairness, so that's not really a fair...
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll give you to Mike's team.
Yeah. That's fine.
Based on allergies, we'll
Sorry,
give you to Mike's team.
Yeah.
So Speakeasy is Team Kit Kat.
So
I quit.
So yes, feel free to dig in.
Awesome.
So yeah, we always offer that to our guests as a thank you.
That's fantastic.
So in addition to this morning, because there are so many of you guys, we brought donuts. So
Yeah, we love it.
So you're currently running the Kansas collection, and how you're going to do this and Johnny Part 3 is, I mean, that's a whole other conversation that we won't get into so we don't stress you out.
Everyone at the table is shaking their head.
But with this, you're doing something a little bit different. The first thing is you're separating it into chapters, and you're also adding an ARG component to it, where we, in real life, we are chatting with the characters. And just as a fan, like, it's so much fun. Like, it's so cool that you're going down this road. And I'm just wondering who came up with this and what was the method behind it?
Yeah, I mean, it was, in some ways, the Kansas collection was kind of a happy accident, where there was some interest in potentially interrogating some of the Oz mythos at some point. But we were approached by Noah Nelson when Indiecade was coming about this past year, and he said, can you design a piece that's custom tailored for a game conference with certain specific parameters, and we ended up crafting this piece, and it met with a lot of positive response, and so we, like with many things, completely deviated from our earlier plans and started to try to investigate this as a possibility. But I think I'm sorry, go ahead.
I don't want to. I'm sorry. So sorry to interrupt you, but I think you're selling yourself short. Positive. I'm putting positive in quotation marks because how quick at Indiecade did it fill up for the night?
Yeah, within 5 minutes. Yeah. we had more audience than we could handle for the entire evening.
Which, congratulations to that. And
absolutely,
that was just incredible.
Well, and I think though part of why that happened, it goes to the driving force of what makes immersive theater exciting, right? You're at this game festival, and here is this colorful tent set up in the middle of a field and lots of other stuff around it, but don't you want to know what's inside it? Mm-hmm. And it's real. It's a real tent in a real field, and it doesn't look like a tent you see every day. And I think there's an intrigue with that, and I think that is part of what's exciting about immersive theater is it's the chance to encounter something out of the ordinary. And so I do think even though with this piece we're exploring the ARG thing and some of the gaming technique stuff, at its core it is still immersive theater, and it is still that's the core of the experience, is getting to experience something new or a situation that's unknown.
The heart of each chapter as well focuses on like a moment where you are with those characters. Like it's never like about the other stuff around it. It always leads you into that moment, and then it leads out of that moment. But every chapter is centered on a moment with the characters.
But that being said, I think we were talking earlier about how our pieces, one sort of hallmark of the way that we work is that the piece extends beyond the end of the piece, right? It extends to the point of conversation. And so this, in some ways, I think was diving deeper into that space of how do we actually keep the performance going over the course of several weeks when you're seeing it in this episodic format.
And this was something that, Julianne and I were talking about when we first started Speakeasy. What are additional ways that we can interact with an audience other than in the live element, and how can we continue story over other mediums? And this one has been so much fun to do because it kind of keeps unraveling itself to us in a way, and we keep adding extra layers and coming up with more where this could go and where it is going.
And I think one of the exciting challenges about it is, so there's this extra content, there's these extended conversations happening, and again, you want it to all be meaningful, right? Mm-hmm. You do want things to pay off. You do want there to be an ultimate, larger narrative and story experience that everyone goes down. What's new to us about this is obviously it's how it's unraveling over time, and obviously time in this case is a much bigger continuum than normal, and so that's been exciting for us. But I think it's also really exploring, it's this idea of like there's all this extra stuff. How do we guarantee that the core, you come to a chapter, and if you just engage for that hour for that night, that's a full experience, and that you can just tune in every time you buy your ticket and have a fully engaged experience. Or if you want to go down these offshoots, that there's a whole bunch more information and story that you can experience, but that if you don't have that, you're still fine.
You probably also need to check your email in order to have a full experience. experience, in fairness. But beyond that, you don't have to do all of the extra, because there's scavenger hunt elements, there's puzzle elements, there's lots of potential interaction with characters over voicemail or text. There's a lot there for people who are interested in that. But to your point, you can still have a very full core experience by just engaging with the base materials.
That being said, to highlight that, checking your email is good. There is some important content that gets delivered that way.
Are you having people not do that?
Yeah, or just saying, I mean, we had
or
a couple
they see
like,
they got
I bought
the
a ticket
email and
for
don't go
this
into
day,
it.
but can I come this day instead? No, that's not how it works.
But the email we do, there is a fair amount of content that's useful to get that we give via email that we feel like that's easy enough to.
Yes.
And it's connecting each chapter, where that's something that we're really
and along that line, if someone is entering, you might want to give us a real email address if you care to. Continue, and you might want to write it in a way that we can read it to guarantee that you can. But it's interesting, right? I mean, you do a survey, people ask for your personal information.
Yes.
Like many people give fake info, and there is giving strangers your contact info is always a choice. But it is interesting because obviously, if you give us fake information, we can't
give you the materials that you're going to need to enjoy the piece, and we're not using your info for any nefarious purposes. I promise. I understand the hesitation, but it does make me a little bit sad because that is our method of delivering material to people. So,
and something that Matthew just commented on, the idea that okay, great, there's a puzzle. After the second chapter, there was the potential that you needed to contact someone. That didn't happen for me. It happened for someone else in my group. But so they contact someone, and if that never goes any farther, just that contact, the fact that you guys have delivered this one additional thing after the show continues after you walk out of that building. Like, that's plenty. That's more than a lot of companies are doing. And so I think it's partially up to the patron to determine how much they want to dive in. So I think it's very valid in the fact that of what you brought up of like, there's that one additional little thing. And for a lot of people, that will be fine. That'll be really special.
Because I do think, as I mentioned, we are exploring the gaming techniques and the ARG aspect. In the end, we are really committed with this, though, towards we do want to honor that you're on a journey and there's a story and that we are going somewhere. And that we're going there together, right? Because I do think, it's an individual experience. The reality is everyone is on the larger story. Everyone's walking down the path.
They just have different offshoots that
can happen within it, and you experience that path in small groups, right? And I think that's what's interesting is, in the moment it does feel like, this is only an experience that I'm having with one or two people, 3 people, but truthfully, right, 100 people had said experience, and that was their next step in the story. So there's an interesting, I think, it does feel so individualized, but also that there is this kind of larger track running.
And I think people are definitely reacting to it. I mean, for example, Chapter 3 for The Door went on sale and sold out in a couple hours.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Which, congratulations to that.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
And thank you to everyone who bought those tickets. It's a really refreshing feeling to know that we're connecting with people on that level. People are excited about it.
And we are looking at remount dates to make more tickets available as well.
Oh, good.
Yeah. It is coming.
Yeah,
we promise.
We just kind of have to pause it momentarily while we do Johnny.
That's part of the challenge, because the Johnny thing does feel very important to us that it happened now, that we close that loop. And as we said, we weren't necessarily anticipating that we'd be moving so aggressively on the Kansas collection. So we're sort of caught in the middle. But we will come back to continue with Kansas collection after we're done with Johnny as well. So.
Thank you guys so much again for being here. We really, really appreciate it. And, we are huge fans, obviously. So can you give us your website info and any other relevant info you have about the Speakeasy Society?
Absolutely. So our website is www.speakeasysociety.com, and you should look for tickets on sale for Johnny 3 now. We'll be going up in May, so that'll be Thursday through Saturday for each weekend of May. You can follow us on Instagram at the Speakeasy Soch, and on Twitter also at the Speakeasy Soch as well.
And I have one quick question. Where did the name Speakeasy Society come from?
So that's kind of a funny story. We had created this piece in the bathroom at Cal Arts, and we were going to be putting it up in Los Angeles proper. And through some guidance, we were told we need a name. This is going to be your first show officially, so you should pick one before it goes up because you need a brand what it is you're doing. And so there was a lot of back and forth, and
There were a lot of options that we went through.
There might have been a moment where Invisible Roller Coaster was on the table. We are cat fans, so there were some names that potentially had cats in the title.
Those were vetoed.
But in the end, we wanted to pick a name that we felt, in some ways, suggested an idea of community again, that you're going to come see our show, and in a way, you're potentially being invited into the community, into experiencing what is the Speakeasy Society. It's a group. It's an experience. It's in some ways a larger entity than a singular show.
And you become a part of that society by seeing the shows.
And also an extra layer of reality, because I think when we're at our best and we're doing things well, you leave the show and you look at the world in a different way, whether that's just for an hour or for a week or for the rest of your life.
And so it is multi-level, right? The Speakeasy Society. What is it? Is it a core company? Is it the people who are in the piece? Is it the audience? It's all those things.
Also, we liked speakeasies.
We enjoy a good cocktail, and if it's appropriate to the show, we like to incorporate it.
So every level.
Do you have any last final thoughts?
You know, I always have a last thought. You guys can edit it out if you want to. No, but you know, it is again, you know, thinking about the audience relationship, and you know, it is. We take great joy in creating work and creating work for the audience, and it's an honor to be able to share it with people, and that people give us the space to create these experiences for them. And I think, you know, obviously the immersive community is growing. There's a lot of companies doing this right now, and that's really exciting. It's awesome that this form is picking up and that more people are aware of it and wanting to engage. I do think, though, it creates a sense of responsibility. We as a company have a responsibility to create to take care of our audiences and to create the best experience possible, because we don't want to alienate people from the forum. And I think that's something across the scene. I do think all companies have a fair amount of responsibility when creating a show or a product. You might be people's first entryway into it, and I think there is a weight and a weight to that, and we want to encourage people to further explore the forum. And so I do think there's a fair responsibility as creators in this field right now, and
we're pioneers in a way.
Yeah, all of the companies right now
Yeah.
are pioneering a field, and we definitely want to do that with care, because I think it is an intense form at times, and I think we want to just make sure that we're not scaring away audience members or not taking care of them in a way that can allow them to continue forward in the investigation.
And I think I also just want to say that we're deeply grateful to be able to be making this work, and we're grateful that there are audiences that are responding to it. And you know, this is Julianne spoke earlier about sort of the grayness of the day-to-day existence. You know, the work that we create in the company is the most exciting thing that we do. We're grateful to have one another as collaborators, and grateful to be able to make this work for all of you. So thank you for coming and seeing it.
Well, thank you, guys. Thank you so much for being willing to have this conversation. I am so excited for the next shows. I really am. Oh, you've given me a lot of good times for the last couple of years. That's great. That's great. So, and oh wait, I have another question. So, is the Hollow ever going to come back?
Ah, interesting.
So both, I think we can comment on that both with the Hollow and Ebenezer. Those are two pieces that kind of occupy a different space in our canon, so to speak. They fulfill kind of a different role, and they're
very different.
They're very different, and we love them both. The Hollow, should it come back, I think it would definitely have some larger revisions done to it. But we're definitely still excited about the piece. Again, we've just had these opportunities come up in a way that have mixed up our calendar. We keep kind of hypothetically saying, like, okay, we're going to do the Hollow this year, or we're going to do Ebenezer this year, and then an out-of-the-blue opportunity happens, and just our bandwidth, as we are a small but mighty group, we have to make choices about what to do next. Ebenezer, on the other hand, we are looking for a new home for that piece. It's a very large and involved piece, so the space needs a lot to make it work.
But both of those shows are on our radar as things that we would like to revisit in some way in the near future, hopefully.
So they are still on the active list.
Yeah, they're kicking around.
That's awesome. I'm so happy you just said that.
And I guess that's worth, I don't know that we have any show that we would never revisit. A lot of it would be about, space, situation, the right moment. I think we do look at creating a piece as an ongoing experience. So once it's existed the first time, that's just kind of the beginning of our relationship to it. So I do think there is a chance that any of our work could eventually find its way back to kind of the season or the docket.
Cool.
So going off that, Chris was mentioning that there were a couple throwaway scripts based on location. Would you ever do some sort of remix show where it would be in a different location and using those alternative scripts?
I mean, there's always a chance, right?
It's definitely not no. It's just we'll just see what happens.
Strangely, to those scripts, they might wind up in a completely different show, totally re-envisioned. So they could wind up in an existing piece they'd initially been intended for, or somewhere completely different. Also, if I can throw one thing out, I do always just want to acknowledge all the people we collaborate with.
Absolutely.
We are so lucky as a company to work with incredibly talented designers, performers, and the work very much could not exist without them. They are so generous and so giving and so talented and bring so much to the table. And it's been exciting. They are vital to the experiences we are creating. And I just think, oftentimes in immersive theater, there isn't a traditional program. Obviously, there's never a curtain call or bow at the end. Generally, the performers disappear into the night, and I just really... I do want to acknowledge all the work they do and what they bring to the piece, because again, the pieces would not exist without them, and the quality of the work is very much in part due to their talents and generosity.
Absolutely, and particularly want to recognize one core collaborator who's John Henningsen, who's our producing director, and we were asking earlier about the creation of the Kansas collection. He's actually from Kansas and grew up there, so the Keep Kansas Clean sign that you see, that's his personal property. And,
that's funny.
Yeah, so he's actually imparted a lot of very specific knowledge about the way that the Oz lore has manifested itself in Kansas in a modern context. And
that's interesting.
Yeah, and a lot of elbow grease as well. So.
And also, on your website, you do have a very long list of collaborators that you give acknowledgement to. So, if anyone's interested in learning those names that you just mentioned, there is a long list on the website, some of them with links to those people's work.
Absolutely, yeah.
And once again, thank all of you, Julianne, Matthew, Genevieve, Chris. Thank you very much for coming to the My Haunt Lot podcast and sharing a little bit of your creative process, about what's coming up. We know so many people who are fans of your work, and we just really want to thank you for the honor of this interview.
Thank you so much for having us.
No, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So again, a huge, huge thank you to the Speakeasy Society for being here and speaking with us. Like, Russell and I just looked at each other with our jaws dropped. They just left, and it's just like, wow, like that was such a fun interview, and just because we're such huge fans and hearing everything that they're saying about their shows, and I love things like this.
Yeah, this was their integrity about the world of the immersive theater and creating their experiences. This is one of those companies that I just will always come back to, and I really, really appreciate them coming and letting us nerd out with them a little bit about the creative process and what's coming up.
Yeah, like you can tell that they are fans first.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
They love the art form, and they love creating, and they love storytelling, and just like everything they were saying about how they want everyone to have a good experience. And that's customer service. I mean, we also talk about customer service like in general, but it just like they're just so on top of things, and it's I'm so excited for what they have coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. This has been a really, really, really fun conversation for us to have.
Yeah. So thank you again, guys. And we will definitely see you soon.
Thank you so much for coming out and letting us talk to you.
And thank you everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed this as much as we have. I'm Mike.
And I'm Russell.
See ya.
You haven't talked a lot today.
Just because you were geeking out. I wanted to let you have your moment.